online.
Good morning. Oh, sorry, good afternoon. Just checking, making sure everybody can hear me okay. All right. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I am Nitsitokitopi. I'm a proud member of the Blood Tribe and the Chief of Police for the Blood Tribe Police Service. As stated earlier, my English name is Grant Buckskin. I would like to thank the committee for providing the opportunity to make a short statement and hope that our concerns are heard and addressed. I have been in First Nations policing for 35 years and have served not only my home community, but I've had the honor to serve in other First Nation communities within Alberta and Manitoba. Over the years, the challenges of First Nations policing have always remained the same and have been discussed at length and include chronic underfunding, funding model failures, recruitment and retention issues, systemic racism and bias, a lack of trust and accountability, absence of police service legislation, essential service legislation. The lack of federal legislation recognizing Indigenous policing as essential service means that Indigenous police forces do not have the same rights or protection as other forces. This also inhibits and limits our negotiating power during funding talks. It goes without saying that these are valid challenges and issues and have been documented and discussed at length. When the conversation turns to essential service designation for First Nations policing, there is hesitation and a refusal to recognize our services as an equal to our non-First Nation police services. So I ask these questions. As a First Nations police service, are we not considered as important? Are we not deserving of the same designation? Would we face the same challenges if we were a newly formed police service in a small municipality? There are reports that have been released that state the challenges. These are the very challenges that I have addressed. Yet there is very little addressed these issues. Other police chiefs and associations have been advocating for this essential service designation for years. Yet it remains out of our reach. I have not been a part of these essential service discussions, but history has shown that there is a bias towards many issues that are related to First Nations. I suspect that this is the case in this pursuit. I'm speaking today with the hope that we can reach an understanding on the importance of this designation for First Nations policing. But again, I'm going to ask, how many more committees, reports, and meetings will be held to discuss these same issues repeatedly without any resolution? We know the issues. We know the challenges that have been placed in front of us from day one. In closing, I hope our participation and our words that we will share today will be heard and a plan of action developed. We are still here. We have thrived despite the challenges mentioned, and we will continue to provide adequate, culturally appropriate policing to our respective communities. We only ask that we be treated fairly and in the same manner as our non-First Nation counterparts and police services. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grant. And now for our next speaker, please, for 5 minutes.
Members of Parliament, Mr. Chairman, members of the INAN Committee, thank you for welcoming me here today. We are gathered on the unceded ancestral territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, which is my nation, and which has inhabited, protected, and honoured these lands since time immemorial. I would also like to thank the interpreters and committee staff. My name is Annick Wild. I've been Chief of the Pikogan Police Service for 5 years now, a police officer for 37 years, and Vice President also of the Quebec Association of First Nations and Inuit Police Directors. I speak today as a frontline operator who experiences on a daily basis the concrete impacts of funding and governance decisions. First of all, on the question of funding stability. Stable funding is the key to everything. Working with short-term agreements means living in constant uncertainty. We cannot plan our hiring, nor guarantee training, nor replace equipment on time. A 5-year framework agreement that would be indexed and reviewable midterm would finally give us the predictability that we need to manage our services effectively. When we know where we're going, we can consolidate, group together purchases and obtain better prices, and above all, we can protect our officers, our police officers. So let me be clear here. Predictability costs less than emergencies. In my department, this stability would avoid having to choose between two bad options, namely operating with outdated equipment or postponing patrols. My officers have already worn expired bulletproof vests because of procurement delays and unpredictable budgets that left us with no other choice. No other police force in Quebec would accept this. Another issue that weakens us is the question of actuarial catch-up of our pension plans. Recent salary increases were necessary, but without funding to adjust the plans, the bill is being passed on to small organisations such as mine. Our pension funds are not on par with those of provincial or municipal forces. As a result, our police officers invest as much and take as many risks but do not enjoy the same retirement security. If we want to recruit and retain the next generation, then there must be real parity, including when it comes to pensions. It's a matter of fairness, but also of sustainability. A dedicated fund for actuarial catch-ups and adjustment would ensure this equity without weakening our operations. I was also part of the last cohort that was trained at the Mashtiwash Indigenous Police Academy. So I'm talking here about training. So I was at the Mashtiwash Indigenous Police Academy before training became centralised in Nicolet. And this was a locally based and culturally adapted model. And I strongly believe in this type of model. Today, when I send an officer for advanced training or requalification at the NPQ, the Quebec National Police Academy, I lose a resource out in the field and I have to pay overtime to my remaining staff in order to fill in the gaps. So for a small service like mine, these costs add up quickly. And yet, we have trainers in our ranks who come from Indigenous police forces that are fully certified by the Quebec Police Training Academy. For example, there's an instructor from Pitiquan who was trained at Nicolet, and he could come and offer the same type of training to my team. But he cannot do so without an administrative exemption from the EPNQ, the Quebec Police Academy. This exemption, which takes weeks to obtain, unnecessarily slows down the professional development of our police officers and also increases the administrative burden for training courses that are otherwise equivalent. So we are therefore requesting a complete exemption from the ENPQ exclusive training requirement. Our services should be able to organise their training locally with qualified instructors coming from other Indigenous police forces according to recognised and equivalent standards. This is already the case, for example, for a fully certified trainer from Region 1 who is nevertheless unable to teach elsewhere without an administrative authorisation. Training in our own communities is faster and more economical.
Time more input during the question and answer time, but we've arrived at the 5 minutes. So we would like to go to our first round of 6-minute question and answer period. And we're going to start out with Billy first, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to our two witnesses for sharing with us today. Of course, Oki, Chief Buckskin. Of course, we met a number of weeks ago at the opening of the Chief Cropbeard Wolf Justice Center. And of course, being that I have the family ties from Ghana, but of course being from Treaty 6, but having family ties there, I was very proud to see that happen. And know that Ghana has for a long time had their own police forces, as we've been hearing as a consistent theme in this study thus far, that solutions really lie in the communities themselves. And Ghana, for a long time, has proven through their self-investment and their risk-taking that they are serious when it comes to protecting their community. I'm hoping you can elaborate on, of course, we know the struggles when it comes to funding and recognition, but I'm hoping you can elaborate on some of the successes and lessons learned. So if there's other First Nations, Métis, or Inuit communities who want to start their own police forces, and of course, hopefully in the future there will be better supports for that. But regardless, what lessons what are some of the things that you would have done different, and some of the successes when in the short summary of like some of the best lessons in summary that Ghana has learned since establishing the Blood Tribe police forces that other nations can learn from?
Sorry, I apologize. I take especially great pride in the fact that, I'll go back a little bit here. I began my career here back in the early 90s. And, at that time, we already knew there were, a lot of challenges that we were facing. But the one thing that always remained consistent and that we always took pride in was that we were familiar with the community, with the people here. I mean, these are people who are, they're not just community members, they're family, they're friends. I grew up here, and, over the course of my career, I've had to deal with, families and friends over the course, and, in not some so good situations. But the one thing that was always constant was we always conducted ourselves in respecting the culture and how we grew up and what we were taught by our elders and the knowledge keepers. And as our service progressed and we began to expand, and we always kept that. And even to today, my biggest pride, my biggest source of pride is the fact that we have gone to considerable lengths to ensure that we remain a culturally appropriate police service. We've taken into account our customs. We've taken parts out of Ganasini, which is the Elders' Declaration. And we've respected that by including it and making it a part of our mission statement, our values. And that's what we're proud of the most. We've always faced these challenges, but we've always thrived. We found ways to survive. So, when on top of the fact that we're building this culture appropriate service, we're also especially proud of the fact that despite of all these challenges, as not just First Nations people, because my police service is not just strictly First Nations. I've got non-Native officers here, and we've always made it a point from day one. We tell them, okay, you're going to learn about the culture. We're not going to force it down your throat, but there's going to come a time where, during the course of your duties, you're going to go in somewhere, and we need you to be respectful when you go to these places, and we will help them. So now I can honestly say, when any of my officers, whether they're First Nations or non-First Nations, community members or not, they're very respectful to our people. And people, one of the big things was, okay, well, now it's trauma-informed policing. Well, I think not only will just the Blood Tribe Police Service, but any other First Nations police service, particularly First Nations officers, we've lived it. We know it. In trauma-informed policing is nothing new to First Nations police.
Follow-up question, building upon some of the strengths that you've mentioned, tough conflicts of interest aspects unique to Indigenous communities with families and things of that nature. And a tough situation that Ghana faced recently in the last decade, of course, is the influx of street drugs, fentanyl. And I recall even hearing about funerals being backed up for 3 weeks over there. And a very tough situation for the nation to deal with. How did the nation, and Canada actually is going through a similar thing, of course. It doesn't just affect First Nations. It's in Lethbridge, it's in Edmonton, Calgary, Toronto, West Coast, East Coast. But, we're never satisfied until there's 0 deaths when it comes to hard drugs. But I do understand that things have gotten a little bit better through several initiatives and things on tough love, as we, again, say in our communities, tough love is still love. But what has Ghana done to address the drug crisis over the last number of years?
Excuse me, Grant, that brings us to the end of the 6 minutes, but perhaps there'll be an opportunity to answer that through another question or somewhere down the line. So that brings us to Jaime for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for your service and your commitment to justice. I didn't get a chance to hear much about both of your police forces, how many people you represent, how many police do you have working. But my question really is, how important is it to have your communities policed by members of that community or of the people who are part of that nation in terms of the work every day that you do? From each of you, if I could. Chief Buckskin, you can start if you like.
Okay. It's a very fine line, especially if you're policing your home community. Like I said, I've over the course of my career, I've had to deal with family members, uncles, aunts, cousins, and for the most part, they've been, very, very respectful. And, of course, there's going to be that period where they're angry with you, and it's going to last, 2-3 weeks. But you meet them at some family function, and, they'll apologize, and then you move on from it. One of the toughest things, and I got to say this right off the bat, because it just happened just recently. We had an event here a couple of days ago, and the acting sergeant had to become the incident commander for the situation that involved a death. Well, this was a close family member. So because of that, you have situations like that. I myself personally have gone to a sudden death where it's been a close cousin that I grew up with, and, you have to investigate it. because, putting all that aside, you're still a police officer. You still have your duties to perform. So, so you have that. But on the flip side, you go into a complaint, you go into a call somewhere, and you have somebody that's agitated, they're angry, under the influence of drugs or alcohol, let's say particularly alcohol in this instance. You walk in there and they recognize you, they know it's you, they know you're from the same community, and they're more apt to talk to you, and you're familiar with these people. So you know what they're like. So you give them that extra 2-3 minutes to get angry or whatever, but 5 minutes later, you're walking out of the house with them in handcuffs, and they're laughing and joking. I've also gone to complaints as well with, other, say, non-nation members. And once they walk in, they don't recognize them, they don't know who they are, so automatically that level of, engagement does not recede, it does not decrease, it stays up there. So
can I just intervene on that? So would you say
sure.
that someone being familiar with them, a member of their nation, being able to speak the language helps de-escalate situations on reserve when we're talking about policing?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. If people recognize you and you're able to speak the language, that has a significant effect on the whole situation.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Director Wild. Just if you could keep that thought going, does having members of your nation that can speak your language help with community policing?
Oui, ça l'aide beaucoup.
Yes, it really helps. I speak my language, and when I arrive in a situation where the person is a member of the community, I speak to them in my language, and things go quicker. We've already got this trust, and it's much quicker, it's much easier, and much more effective. We're like a reference person for them.
Director Wild, you talked a little bit about the Indigenous Police Academy in your area. Can you tell me more about the Indigenous Police Academies that are out there, and how many are you aware of in Canada that are actually directed towards policing and Indigenous people?
Bien, et l'Académie de police.
The Indigenous Police Academy no longer exists. Now we've just got the Quebec National Police Academy. And the 22 Indigenous police forces are all sent to the ENPQ, the Quebec National Police Academy. But some of them don't go there anymore because there's a language issue for them. There's no translation from French into English. So there's several police corps that are not going anymore to the National Police Academy in Quebec. I don't know what the percentage is, but there's certain Indigenous police forces that are English speaking, and they're finding it difficult to get documents translated in English. This is a real issue. And then there's a question of English speaking trainers. There are certain training sessions at the Quebec National Police Academy are not automatically offered in English.
For the next round, Sébastien, s'il vous plaît, 6 minutes.
6 minutes, Sébastien. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chief Wild. I'm very proud to see you. The last time we met, I think it was when we were putting in the first shovel for the new police centre for the Abitibi Nation. So I'm very proud of you, and well done also for your presentation. It was a very clear one. I've got a first question to put to you as a woman Indigenous Chief of Police. Do you have the impression that you can be an inspiration for the next generation, in particular young women in your community who could also become a police chief and make this commitment towards safety and the community? Yes, I believe that could be the case, because there's several young girls who've come to see me, and there's also students who've come to see me as well to have a discussion with me, and in terms of the CEGEP as well. I've had some discussions there with students in the CEGEP, male and female students, in fact. So I've been a women police officer for 37 years, and I say, yes, I'm proud of this. And I also gave a speech at the 50th anniversary at the Quebec National Police Academy. So it certainly opened up doors for me. And I'd like to always know more. It's always this question of hiring. It's not always easy. But I can tell you that we're working hard on the recruitment side of things. In your opening comments that were very clear, it seemed that you didn't quite have enough time. Would you like to add something? Yes, I had another point that I'd like to raise. Could I continue? Yes, I'm offering you the time to do that, of course. Now, I was just talking about training, in fact, earlier. And I would like there to be a bilingual Indigenous Police Academy being set up in Quebec. That way, we could really structure this regional approach while complying with the ministry's training and certification standards. I'm really in favour of that. I think we need to have an academy for First Nations that would be also adapted to cultural securitization. It's not easy for a student to leave their community, leave everything behind. Perhaps they've already got a family. So it's important for them to be well supported and work with Indigenous trainers that could also be Indigenous women trainers. And then there's the question of the 911. Finally, so a word about this. We've got a critical operational issue with the 911. Our police officers still have to write call cards by hand or by computer after each intervention because there's no dedicated dispatch centre. This makes the work more difficult, it increases delays, and some cases it actually puts lives at risk. At 3 o'clock in the morning, without a functional 911 system, without radio support, patrols often leave with incomplete information. These are avoidable risks. Our communities must be connected to the 911 network with clear protocols and shared funding between governments. It's not about creating a parallel system, but rather aligning and linking our services with Quebec's common standards to ensure a rapid, safe and equitable response. So after 37 years of service, I firmly believe that stable funding, equal pension plans, appropriate and recognised training and full access to 911 are in fact the 4 pillars that would enable our police forces to fully play their essential service role. Make which that's crystal clear. Now, in Quebec, the Vian Commission was a catalyst to improve relations between police forces and Indigenous communities. So which concrete progress has been made since 2019 in terms of cultural training and accountability mechanisms to have police forces that are adapted to Indigenous realities, including, for example, your police service up in Picogan? Well, in terms of the community police station that I worked on, that's been positive, but there's several things that haven't yet been respected. When it comes to the calls for action from the Vian Commission, there's some of those that have not yet been respected. I haven't taken note of the exact ones for the calls to action, but I can tell you that not all of these have been respected by the government. But there's some of them that have been a success. A major issue is to be able to recognise the Indigenous police services as an essential service. There's discussions underway on this. And of course, this is important for Abitibi-Témiscamingue in our region. We're perhaps talking about having a regional Indigenous police, Anishinaabe force that could be set up. So if it's designated an essential service, could that really make a difference for you? Well, first of all, if it's an essential service, it has to be established in legislation because at the moment we're considered just as a project. So if we could change this into an essential service, the Indigenous police forces, it really is essential. The 22 Indigenous police forces in Quebec could really benefit from this so that we we could be this essential service. It's something that's really in our grasp. It should have been there yesterday. And we also need to increase the number as well. 6 minutes are up. Miigwech.
Is the second round, and this will be 5 minutes for Jamie from the Conservatives.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses again on this very important study as we try to figure out a path forward with Indigenous policing. And I think all sides are extremely interested in finding a path forward to hopefully one day make this reality, hopefully sooner rather than later. Maybe I might start with, I have a question for both witnesses, but maybe Chief Buckskin, maybe I'll start with you if I could. As you listed some of the challenges through previous questions, perhaps, and I apologize if I missed it, perhaps I can get an idea of what types of crimes are you seeing most often? Are you seeing kind of a small amount of people repeating and the justice system failing with the bail system we currently have, sending repeat offenders back out so quickly? Maybe you can just give us a kind of a picture of what you're dealing with, and I'll get the director to respond as well to the same question and then some follow-up questions.
Absolutely. What we deal with out here on a regular basis is, I guess you would refer to as a crimes against persons. We have a lot of violent crime. We have a lot of assaults, aggravated assaults. The recidivism rate is, it's quite high. Our bail reforms, our bail, our catch and release programs are, I don't know any, they're ineffective. I mean, we go out, we catch, we catch a bad guy, we put him in jail, and they're back out, and, you're sitting there, you're looking at their criminal records and their pasts, and, you sit back and you think, okay, well, perhaps this guy should not be out, yet is right back out. I don't have an answer how to fix it, nor would I even begin to suggest that I would even know where to start. Our justice system needs some overhauling. That could lead us right back into, especially on the First Nation side, is we have all these social problems, and I think we're all educated here. We all know, particularly in First Nations community, where all these social problems began and where it started, and we're still dealing with it. These are the residual effects of colonization and stuff that has gone on in the past. And, I totally understand that as a police officer. I understand that as a First Nations person. But there has to be some change done in, whether it's through the justice system or through, how we're conducting our bail hearings, and just the whole process itself needs to be addressed and changed.
Thank you, Chief. And Director, same question, please.
Pouvez-vous répéter la question?
Could you please repeat the question for me?
Yeah, absolutely. It was more about just getting a picture of what you and your team are dealing with on a daily basis. From what we've been hearing previous witnesses, it's usually a small amount of people creating more and more crime. They get arrested, out on bail immediately, back in the community, doing the same thing. I just want to get a picture of if you're dealing with the exact same thing that we're hearing in previous testimony.
And you have about 30 seconds to condense that.
Follow-up questions.
Ben, c'est sûr que nous,
Well, we also have big social problems, and it comes from the Indian residential schools. It didn't just start yesterday. So we have to review the justice system. As Grant has said, we're in the same situation here. There's many things that are happening in Quebec. We arrest them. I also come across family members in my work, and then they're released, and then they come back into the community. Then afterwards, we're the ones who have to deal with them afterwards. We're the ones who have to try and tackle all of that. So I think that you have to consult us first if there's going to be major changes made. Always a matter of consultation and have a listening ear.
5 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you both for your testimony today, for being here with us and sharing your important information. I've got a question again for each of you. So, Chief Buckskin, I believe that recently the Blood Tribe Police Services received $6.8 million in federal funding through the First Nations and Inuit Policing Facility Program for the construction of a new detachment. And I understand, if I'm correct, that both the province of Alberta and the Blood Tribe also contributed to this important project, showing that, you know, these kinds of partnerships, when everyone is involved, everyone's at the table and contributing, really demonstrates how we can progress together and move things forward. From your perspective, what can we do to build on this kind of collaboration to ensure that long-term and sustainable support is there for Indigenous policing?
Well, to me, the answer is quite obvious, and that would be First Nations receiving essential service designation. I mean, you get that, you put us on an equitable, and you know, we have, it's fair. You know, now we're all the issues that we spoke of earlier, and particularly recruiting and retention. You know, since I've taken over as, well, since I was appointed, I shouldn't say taken over, that just sounds wrong, but since I was appointed as the chief of police, I have lost probably 10 officers to other police services. And each one, when we do an exit interview, it always comes down to the same thing. We do not have a robust pension plan. We have tried to enter into pension plans within Alberta and federally, and we've been met with nothing but roadblocks. And the main point in all these arguments is because of the funding model, because it's a program. They're scared to take us on because they're afraid that, like any program, the funding could stop, it could get shut down, and they're going to lose their share as well. So for us, the biggest and the one that's going to improve everything for us as First Nations Police Service is that Essential Police Service designation.
Thank you very much for that answer. My next question, c'est pour Annick Wild.
And now for Annick Wild. I think that recently you've received support from the Quebec government to launch an intervention model that will deal with homelessness and mental health, and it's a partnership between the police forces and psychosocial workers, which was inspired from the approach used in Val d'Or. So could you speak a bit more about this model with us in the community, and what are your hopes? What do you hope is going to be possible thanks to this? I hope that we're going to have good collaboration. First of all, it is for the community. It'll be easier to have community-based interventions made by our police officers thanks to this. And it's also to have de-escalation. When we have a P38 issue, it'll be quicker to try and not quite reduce, but it will help the police officers out on the beat. With having this type of, for example, social worker support who will be there as well. Has this project already got going? It's about to start very soon. Yes, very soon. Just a moment. In February, you were still waiting for the psychosocial workers to come. Is that still a challenge, or have you been able to reach certain recruitment levels that you wanted to reach? Yes, it has been a real challenge. It's a real challenge for all of the communities to try and find a resource from the community. That's what's a real challenge for us. And also to have that link of trust. Thank you. And now Mr. Lemieux for...
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Madame la directrice de police.
Thank you, Chief Wild. At the beginning of the week, we had Captain Robert Durand from the Val d'Or Police Forces, and it was interesting to hear him talking about joint forces and the collaboration with your police service. And I think he said that you had to take difficult choices in terms of funding. So could you explain how the lack of funding has had an impact on the service that you're able to offer on the spot with this joint police force? Well, in terms of funding, when there were cuts in terms of the funding for the community police station, I was actually repatriated here already, so it didn't actually impact me. I already came back before then. So does Picogan actually help the Val d'Or police force, or how does this actually work on the ground? And also I'd like to ask if sometimes you come in and help other Indigenous people who are in a distressed situation, for example, in the urban centre near Val d'Or. Yes, that I've sometimes gone down there because we have reference points. When you can speak their language, it's easier to chat in Anishinaabe with this type of intervention with a homeless person. Once again, there's trust that's already established. And the collaboration with the white police forces, is that a winning solution? Can you talk about your experience with the other police officers and how that actually improves their knowledge and understanding of Indigenous communities on the ground? Up here, we've got Allochtone non-Indigenous police officers who work with us directly, and there's several who have gone down to Sûreté de Québec. And there's a real mix, and they find it easy to intervene and work with the First Nations. So I find it's a good mix, a good exchange. Thank you, and I'll take the last seconds to congratulate you, and once again, thank you for your commitment to give me a gwitch.
Thank you very much. And now we have Philip for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for appearing here today, and thank you for your public service. I think we've heard much about the importance of police service in Indigenous communities being deemed essential. I've heard you both talk about insufficient funds. So my question is along the lines of the insufficient funds, acknowledging that you are the chief and are the director. When you measure the insufficient funding, I want you to talk to us about where those shortcomings actually appear. Is it boots on the ground from the community? Is it in bricks and mortar? Is it in lack of equipment? Talk to us in a little more detail about that, if you would, please. I'll start with the chief.
All right, thank you. For us, it is everything. I mean, you know, we're talking about, you know, recruiting and manpower and resources. You know, it's very hard, and I'm going to go back to a remark that I read that Chief Gerald Swamp made recently, and that is, how can we approach a young person within the community to come and join the police service, yet we can't offer them a proper pension, benefits, and something, you know, and everything else associated to that side of the job. When we can't offer them that. They're interested in policing, so they go look at a Lethbridge or a Calgary, and they're offered all this. So where do you think this young person is going to go? They're not going to come and work for the Blood Tribe Police Service. They're going to go over to a municipal service that offers all these other benefits that I cannot. So that right there is the beginning of the effect on resources. We can't find proper staffing. I'm running with 37 people right now. And this is the highest that we've had for resource manpower-wise. Now, if we want to get into the First Nations policing program in terms of conditions, some of them have been lifted. So now we're able to create specialized units that non-First Nation services take for granted, such as, your canine, your general investigation services. So, yeah, it's a whole combination of everything. I don't want to take up too much time. I'll give my counterpart a time, opportunity to speak.
Director Webb.
Je vais le faire en français.
I'll make my comments in French. As I said earlier, it's a stable funding that really is the key to everything. If you've got good, stable funding, it's very important. And it's important to be recognised as an essential service. That's what's also important. In my particular case, as I explained, there's a question of equipment, but it's across the board, really. Across the board, we've got all these different needs. So stable funding, pension plans, training, all of that is important so that I can plan for my hires, but I have to guarantee training and replace equipment on time. I can't always do that because of funding. And that's what always comes up. If my agreement comes to an end tomorrow morning, then what do I tell my staff? I've already experienced this sort of thing where people have said to us, look, you're going to have to do something else with this constable because your agreement has not been signed. So we need to have this stable funding and be recognised as an essential service.
We'll do Bob for 5 minutes, please, Mr. Zimmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chiefs, for coming today. I'm going to start with, this is our study on First Nations and Inuit policing, as you know, and for Chief Grant Buckskin. So from an article in October 27, 2022, police chiefs urge Ottawa not to rely on forces to oversee gun buyback program. And the article states, the Liberals plan a mandatory buyback program to offer compensation to affected owners and businesses. 2, Regina Police Chief Evan Bray, appearing at a House of Commons committee on behalf of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, says the buyback will be an administrative process involving a massive amount of work. And 3, Bray told MPs that police are already overstretched and lack the resources to administrate the buyback or to administer the buyback program. And Chief, with countless fellow police chiefs pushing back against the Liberal firearm confiscation ban, and again, we're studying sort of what's the lack of, accessibility. You even mentioned it in your statement about it's hard to recruit officers and really hang on to them. And so my question is, those limited recruits that you have and officers that you have, do you think it's a good use of already understaffed First Nations and Inuit police officers to go after law-abiding First Nations and Inuit firearms owners?
Absolutely not. That would be a complete waste of resources. I mean, we're stretched thin already, and I am not going to put the community at risk by removing resources from our front line to oversee something like that. No, it'd be a complete waste of resources.
Thanks, Chief. My second question is for Chief Anik Wild, and I'll refer to the Auditor General's report on what we're studying today on page 15, section 354, and this is a quote directly from the report. We found that over the past 5 years, the RCMP had not fully staffed the community tripartite agreement positions that it received funding for from the program. This means that some communities with community tripartite agreements were not being served by the agreed on number of officers to enhance the policing services provided through provincial or territorial police service agreements. And again, it goes to what I asked, the chief just previously. My comment, and yet, the government, the Liberal government, still wants to use those sort of finite police resources and limited police resources to target law-abiding firearms owners. So, Chief Anik Wild, with countless fellow police chiefs pushing back against the Liberal firearm confiscation ban, do you support assigning already overstaffed First Nation and Inuit police officers to go after law-abiding First Nations and Inuit firearms owners when they are not the problem?
It needs to be translated into French. I didn't really seize the question. I would need to understand it.
Is translation on, Chair? Because I'm at 3.5 minutes and I just, yeah.
Ça va? They say it's good. Who's having problem?
The witness didn't hear.
Oh, the witness can't hear?
Non, effectivement, j'étais dans l'une, Monsieur le Président, mais effectivement, la
Suspend
traduction se
for
faisait
2
pas.
seconds.
Non, non, ça marche.
Yes, it's working now, but the translation didn't take place during the question. It didn't come through.
Translation didn't work, and sorry, I was...
So should I repeat that question?
Okay, so repeat that question again.
Okay, so I'm
And
at
if we
3
can't hear
minutes
it,
33.
then, yeah, you'll still have your time.
Okay, ready to go? Yeah. Okay, good. We're on? Good. Okay, my second
Sorry about that.
No problem. I don't blame you. So my second question is for you, Chief Anik Wild, and I'm quoting from the Auditor General's report, section 354 on First Nations and Inuit policing program, and quote directly from the report. We found that over the past 5 years, the RCMP had not fully staffed the community tripartite agreement positions that it received funding for from the program. This means that some communities with community tripartite agreements were not being served by the agreed on number of officers to enhance the policing services provided through provincial or territorial police service agreements. And I'll even go on to 355. In the last 3 years, as program funding for officers had increased, the RCMP had not been able to fill these additional positions, leading to a greater difference between the number of officer positions funded and the number filled. And we heard from the previous chief, too, and I'm sure it's the same with you. It's difficult to recruit officers in your police force. So with that understanding and with countless other police chiefs pushing back against the Liberal firearm confiscation ban, do you support assigning already understaffed First Nations and Inuit police officers to go after law-abiding First Nations and Inuit firearms owners when they clearly are not the problem? That's for Chief Wild.
Okay, oui.
Yes. I know that vis-à-vis the RCMP, the tripartite agreement, the number of officers is respected, and I also respect the number of officers, but there was a part that I really didn't understand at the end with the question. Sorry, in terms of the translation.
Talk a little bit slower. It's just for the interpreters to keep
And
up.
just, we're running out of time, so if you need, I'm just suggesting this, if you need more time, you may want to put it into writing. I don't know if.
Well, no, I'd like to ask it now. We've
Okay,
had two cracks at it. I'll just go slower.
You can ask the question, but I think we're going to have to get a response in writing unless it's a very brief answer.
Point out, just to say,
yeah.
I think it was more of a technical issue, not that he ran out of time.
No, I've added the time, but let's just expedite it, so go ahead.
I'll just say it. So, Chief Anik, if this works, I'll just, again, go a little slower. With countless fellow police chiefs pushing back against the firearm confiscation ban, do you support assigning already understaffed First Nations and Inuit police officers to go after law-abiding First Nations and Inuit firearms owners when they aren't the problem? Basically, what I'm asking is, why would police officers take up valuable time to go after law-abiding firearms owners instead of criminals?
Je pense que c'est une question.
I think it's a question of safety. It's important for police officers to be able to put pressure on this. It's important. It's a question of safety also for the officers on the ground.
Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us to the end, and Jaime?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, in order to have a really good understanding of, we're going to be inviting a lot of witnesses in here, and every one of them is probably going to have a different policing service, a different situation. I think they would, and there's been some conversations between us and myself and the Conservatives in the bloc, that it would be great if we could get our witnesses to get some information for us so that we can answer the really good questions and get the clerks to at least be able to give us a little bit of baseline information about the witnesses and especially around when their policing was established, how many communities do they service, how large of an area, how many police officers of that are Indigenous, and basically just gathering that information so that we have a sense of being able to ask questions and understand each community's unique kind of policing service that helps us ask the proper questions.
That's fair. Okay, we'll see that happens. So that brings us to the end. And I wanted to thank our witnesses very much. And we are going to meet. We have a hands up on the chief. You can provide the information that Jaime has asked for via writing, in writing. Go ahead, Chief Grant.
Okay, just in response to the last question about the information that was required. If you visit our website at bloodtribepoliceservice.com, we upload all our annual reports, and that has the bulk of what the question that was asked as far as land-based population calls for service. So it's all there.
Well, thank you very much. The clerk will work with you and future witnesses to bring that information forward. So I really appreciate that very much. So thank you very much, Chief McGuitch. And I'm going to suspend while we get ready for our next witnesses. Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. All right, so welcome back to the second round. Today we have House of Wolf and Associates, Inc., Georgina Nagano, and Una Gare, Chief Operation Officer, and Georgina is the Founder and Chief Executive Officer. Also by video conference, we have Cheryl Gervais, Chief of Police. So please, I will start with the House of Wolf and Associates, Inc. for 5 minutes, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting us to present before the House of Commons Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs to provide testimony as a witness for its study on Indigenous policing and public safety. As I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation that I'm presenting on. My name is Gina Nagano. I am a Trondequichin First Nation and from the Wolf Clan, born in Dawson City, Yukon. However, I made my home in Whitehorse. In 1985, I joined the Royal Canadian Mounted Police when I was 19 years old and served 21 years policing many northern Indigenous communities in Canada. And in 2006, I retired as a sergeant here in Ottawa as my last posting in National Aboriginal Policing. After my short retirement with the RCMP, I worked for the Department of Justice Canada for 7 years and then worked for Correctional Services for 1 year. And I founded House of Wolf and Associates, an Indigenous-owned community safety firm based in the Yukon. We work with nations across the North and Western Canada to rebuild safety on our own terms.
Could you just slow down a little bit for interpretation, just so they can catch up? Thank you.
I just trying to get to my 5 minutes. I'd like to introduce Una Gare, my Chief Operations Officer and a longtime ally of this work we do with nations. The First Nations Inuit policing policy was designed to fund dedicated, culturally responsive policing work. It does not. If it did, I wouldn't be here. Millions of dollars remain unspent and 61 funded positions were never filled. I want to highlight what the Auditor General said during the committee meeting on October 8th. The same recommendations that was made and accepted by Public Safety Canada and the RCMP in 2014 were not acted on by their most recent review in 2024. 10 years, same findings, the policy still from 1996, still no metrics, still no accountability. What we have in place is a revolving door and performative self-congratulatory reporting by the RCMP in community tripartite agreements based on questionable data analysis. Meanwhile, communities are still waiting for the safety they were promised. MP Bob Zimmer, to your astute point during the October 8 committee meeting on this study, the RCMP can't convince enough people to work for them, let alone to move to remote communities where they have no roots in. And as a prior recruiting officer from the RCMP, please don't get me started on the barriers to Indigenous recruitment. So in reality, the FNIPP dollars meant for Indigenous safety get reallocated to overtime and operational costs, flying members in and out on rotation to cover leave or filling desperately needed detachment positions in general policing. It's happening everywhere. The result is no continuity, no relationships, and no trust. Communities sign for dedicated officers, but what they get is a revolving door and another broken promise. Please let me be clear. This is not a failure of the hardworking and good members providing policing services. It's structural. And it is deeply reminiscent of the collective history between Indigenous people and Canada's policing services. So, nations are doing what nations do best. They started working around these systems. They built to meet their own needs, just like they've done since time immemorial. I'm sure MP Hanley, who has been an advocate for this work in the North, may have informed you, and former Chief Doris Bill of the Kwalin First Nation, who has testified before this committee, has already told you about Kwalin trained community safety officers who patrol daily, check on elders, keep tabs on vulnerable people, and diffuse conflict before it becomes crisis. In Teslin, 2 elder women, the deadly aunties, make sure everyone gets home safe, keep eyes on the community, and support families in conflict. Selkirk, Carcross Tagish, Notchonayak Dun, Taku River Tlingit, Delu Deni First Nations all have built versions of community-led safety teams. Other nations are developing theirs now. They're unarmed, prevention first, high trust, and accountable to their governments and people. And they cost a fraction of what reactive policing costs. These are not pilots, they work. Early data backs up. In Kwantlen Dun, emergency calls dropped sharply once the community safety officers began regular patrols, from dozens each month to only a handful. Citizens report feeling safer and more willing to reach out to community safety officers earlier before a situation turns into crisis. We've seen the pattern in Teslin and Selkirk: fewer police calls, fewer violent incidents, increased quality of actionable data on serious criminal matters to the RCMP, and far more community trust. This is what the Auditor General described as missing in the federal program: real engagement, real outcomes, and funding that actually reaches the people it's meant to serve. To quote you, MP Billy Morin, as you reminded this committee, give it back to the communities. That's where the solutions lie. You're right. Nations have already shown what works. Our recommendations are straightforward, and they come directly from the communities we've served, the same ones outlined in our white paper. 1, recognize Indigenous-led safety programs as essential services in law, alongside policing, but not beneath it. 2, fund directly with multi-year needs-based agreements. 3, respect data sovereignty. Nations must have access to their own safety and wellness data, including disaggregated universal crime reporting, to track what's working and hold systems accountable. And 4, support capacity, don't control it. Invest in Indigenous-led training, mentorship, and evaluation so nations can keep leading.
Georgina, I'm
Yes.
going to get you to stop there. We're a little bit over, but the rest of your testimony will come out in questions, I would imagine. So we're going to start the first round, and Eric for 6 minutes. Oh, sorry, yes, sorry, I'm sorry. I skipped over the video conference. 1,000 apologies. We're going to go to Cheryl Gervais. Cheryl for 5 minutes, please.
Bonjour, good evening. Thank you. Good evening, honorable members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to speak today. It's an honor to join the study on Indigenous policing and public safety in my capacity of Chief of Police for Treaty 3 Police Service. My perspective is shaped by lived experience. A First Nation woman from Askate-Wasagigan number 39 First Nation, daughter of a residential and day school survivors, a mother, a community member, and a long-standing member of Treaty 3 Police Service. I've stepped into every role with the purpose of serving as a role model to our youth and amplifying the voices of those we serve, both within my organization and the communities we serve. Our officers work every day to uphold public safety while building trust and cultural connection. Yet our communities continue to face significant inequities, directly tied to chronic underfunding and outdated program structures. When we talk about systemic racism in the justice system, we must begin by naming it. It is not only present in institutions, but in the frameworks that guide them. Indigenous police services have operated for decades under a model that was never designed for our realities. Even today, in our funding negotiations, we've been asked to conform to systems that fail to reflect our unique needs. This is systemic racism in practice, when structures built without us are still imposed on us. The 2024 Auditor General's report and numerous reviews have echoed what we've long known. Funding remains inequitable, partnerships with communities are lacking, and programs have failed to evolve in step with Indigenous self-determination. These challenges extend beyond policing. Every day, our officers respond to issues rooted in the same systemic underfunding: housing, healthcare, infrastructure, education. Public safety cannot be separated from these broader conditions. When Indigenous policing is underfunded, entire communities feel the impact. Still, our service remains proactive. We've implemented innovative programs, advanced mental health priorities through the Indigenous Police Chiefs of Ontario, and introduced body-worn cameras, but this progress is still built on one-time funding, without sustained investment in training, staffing, or infrastructure. No other police service in Canada is asked to compromise so consistently between safety, wellness, and sustainability. On the barriers to Indigenous recruitment, we must acknowledge our history. Treaty 3 Police Service was formed to reclaim our relationship with policing. Yet, 20 years later, we continue to struggle to meet the needs of our communities. And I saw that firsthand when we lost Wabsamung to those very gaps. But there are bright spots. Our community cadet program and our 22 for You campaign engage youth in each of our communities, helping them see policing not as an outside force, but a service rooted in their own values and identities. The study asks how governments can work collaboratively with Indigenous nations to advance safety. The answer begins with Indigenous leadership. We must ask who is missing from the table. The principle of nothing for us, without us, championed by the families of MOIWG, must guide this work. At Treaty 3 Police Service, we've lived this through our community-informed operational review with PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, defining what safety truly means from the community's perspective. Those closest to the community are best positioned to define safety and how to achieve it. Canada must work in true partnership with First Nations, grounded in respect for jurisdiction, self-determination, and the right to equitable public safety. In closing, Indigenous police services are essential. They deserve the same recognition, resources, and respect as any other service in our country. Miigwech, I look forward to your questions.
Miigwech. Eric, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chief Gervais, for being here virtually. It's good to see you again. I know that we've spoken in the past about some of the prescriptive restrictions put on funding that Treaty 3 and other First Nation police services receive, and I'm wondering if you could speak more to that in terms of what those restrictions, that sort of framework that the government provides, how that actually impacts your ability to do your job in the way you want to and as effectively as you want to when those funds are coming already predetermined on where they're going to be going.
To that, I will say certainly growing up within the organization, I started with the service in 2003, grew up in the organization with the goal of retiring in the corner office as chief of police. And, you know, throughout my career as an officer, certainly saw the beauty of Indigenous policing. And as I've grown up in the organization and more so within my role as chief of police, sitting at the funding table now, you know, pulling up my chair to certain tables within my role as chief of police, I've also seen the challenges and disparities within Indigenous policing. And to your question certainly raises that when it comes to the framework, the FNIPP, the model that we work under. We are very much used to doing more with less, which again brings strength and partnerships in our community, but also brings challenges when it comes to mental health of my staff because of the geography we cover, the types of calls for service we respond to, you know, the lack of supports and even resources in community when we're trying to support our communities. And again, in our funding negotiations, the expectations for us to use models or systems that are not built for us, that don't take the cultural responsiveness piece into consideration, the expectations of our communities on Treaty 3 Police Service to provide effective service and equitable service to them in terms of public safety and them feeling safe in their communities, we are failing. And, you know, over 20 years of saying, I'm sorry, we're short, we're trying, I'm tired of saying it, they're tired of hearing it. And so now you see these efforts with Treaty 3 Police Service in, you know, collaboration with the Tri-Coalition, with UCCM and Anishinaabe Police Service in standing united and together and pushing back on those frameworks, such as the FNIPP, and, you know, having that unified voice amongst police leaders in advocating for change. I think the previous guest spoke to the lack of specialty units under the program, which has now been lifted, which is great. It's a step in the right direction, but I still struggle with recruitment. So how am I supposed to fill those positions?
Thank you very much for that very wholesome response. I really appreciate that. And as you mentioned, you and all of Treaty 3 Police are doing incredible work with very limited resources. So I appreciate all that you do to keep people across our territory safe. I hope I have time for one more question, maybe a couple. Obviously, we've seen right across Canada, in municipalities, First Nations, everywhere in between, a crime wave over the last few years. Obviously, bail reform has led to a lot of violent repeat offenders being released. There's been an uptick in gang activity, drugs, smuggling of illegal items, all things that have been happening right across Canada, and certainly Northwestern Ontario Treaty 3 territory is no different. So I'm curious if you can both speak to that challenge, how that's playing out across Treaty 3 communities, but also you mentioned the specialized units and the retention. Obviously, addressing these issues, specialized units are often necessary, whether it's gangs, drugs, human trafficking. I know I packed a lot into that, but I'm wondering if you could speak to that need for specialized units and that retention piece.
Absolutely. And so when you talk about bail reforms and, you know, incidents involving drugs and things of that nature, obviously our service is very well versed in responding to high crime severity calls for service. When it comes to specialty units, we do have positions in place, but again, one-time funding, not sustainable funding. And again, pulls from our front line, which is challenging for us when our communities expect visibility and presence in our community. That definitely came through in our operational review, in the conversations we're having in community. The expectations is very much different on Indigenous police service than I would say a municipal police service. Our communities actually want to see a police cruiser every day. And again, when it comes to fulfilling these positions in our street crime unit and our drug unit, we have a civilian offender management unit of one person, you know, covering our 22 communities. And so those are the challenges put on us in trying to address the issues around drugs.
I think that's probably my time. Thank you, Chief.
Now we'll go to Brendan for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here. Gina, I'm going to concentrate on you. First of all, you didn't get to finish your 5 minutes. Are there some essentials you want to convey quickly? Because I do have a few other questions for you. But if there are any key points in terms of your recommendations, and of course we'll take the written wording as well.
MP Hanley. I've worked inside the RCMP and alongside nations for over 4 decades. It's 40 years, I've aged myself. I know what policing can and can't do. Enforcement alone will never build safety in our Indigenous communities. Safety is built through relationships, prevention, and accountability to one another. We cannot police our way out of trauma. Thank you.
Thank you. That's excellent to hear. You talk about data sovereignty. It reminds me of one story that you related. It was about the impact when Kwanlundan, after a year or so of the CSO program being instituted at Kwanlundan, the number of calls to police went down quite dramatically. Can you briefly recount that?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. When we started doing the community safety work in Kwanlundan First Nation, one of the things that we did look at was the data, and which is the number of police calls over the past year. And in 2015, former Chief Doris Bill had asked us, how many calls of police services do we have to that community? And it was a community of 300 homes, 500 individuals living there, and access to 24/7 policing, 365 days a year, all the resources, 3 FNIPP positions, and it was 1,076 calls, which said every person made 2 phone calls to the police every day. High rates of crime, domestic assault, sexual violence, break-and-enters, etc. We started working with the community and the community safety officer program, and the next year, former Chief Bill says, Gina, can you ask the RCMP how many calls of services did we get to the community in 2016 after we started working there? And Inspector Thompson said 666. I go, no, Archie, I need it for the whole year. No, 666 calls. We dropped the number of police calls by 40% in 1 year.
Have you been able to access ongoing data to establish whether that has continued? Has that been, how are you measuring success?
I'm going to ask my colleague to answer that question. She's done the analyst side of it.
Thank you for asking that question. It is a consistent challenge for nations to access uniform crime reporting data, which is disaggregated, anonymized data from the RCMP around criminal offenses within their communities, as well as outcomes of criminal offenses in their communities. It is an ongoing issue that hamstrings nations' attempts to evaluate their own program and the impacts of their programs. So this has been an ongoing challenge, and one that we have raised time and time again at multiple tables.
Thanks. That's great to know. And so, I think a lot of the success is more on the anecdotal side, and even so, quite dramatic. Certainly, from many of the stories that we hear. Gina, you've been very direct in your recommendations, and that's appreciated. You also haven't really talked much about your own work with House of Wolf and how you work with communities. But maybe you can briefly describe the community survey that you carry out and how that might influence the development or not of a CSO program, and how that might vary with different communities.
Thank you, MP Hanley. Again, I'm going to ask my colleague here to answer that.
I'm not used to the button just pressing itself, so I'm sorry I keep staring at it. Thank you for that question. So we engage in a process called community-based participatory research, which is a mixed methods process of engaging with the community, making sure that we cover about 20% of the people that live within that community, and engaging them in various forms. So we'll do small group engagement followed by in-depth one-to-one qualitative interviews to continue exploring themes. In small communities, it can often be hard to raise things publicly. But when they work with us privately, a lot of things might come out. We do that specifically so that we can help them identify stable dynamic patterns of risk and maladaptive behavior within their communities and design programs within that community. I think we're probably best known for community safety officers and guardians, but it is a web of programs that nations generally action simultaneously to start upriver of the challenges that you're seeing and the challenges that we're all trying to address. So the CSOs are one component. One of the pieces that I really want to highlight, and I know it's peripherally related to your question, MP Hanley, and again, thank you for raising it, is that the current FNIPP program has a binary. Nations have an option of engaging in a CTA, a community tripartite agreement with the RCMP or police of jurisdiction, or deeming their own police force. And that is a very restrictive binary. For a lot of nations that are geographically remote, that have small communities, that might not have the economic means to enact their own police force, it's impossible. So it's a de facto one option.
I think.
Thank you very much. And the next person to ask questions is Deputy Lemire for 6 minutes.
6 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair, Madame Lagano, Madame Gareth. Thank you and well done on your initiatives. I was looking on your website and you got an Inspiration Prize in 2021, and Dr. Henley was one of the people also involved in that initiative back then. And visibly we can see that it's had a real impact. So in terms of the current funding mechanisms, the federal government and provinces and territories, are they sufficient to support these CSO programs led by Indigenous peoples as you're doing? And can you give examples of gaps in funding or consequences? And if you had targeted funding, how could that actually reinforce these self-determined police forces?
Thank you for the question. Funding mechanisms are challenging. The First Nation governments that we work with, they fund the community safety officer programs up front. Part of it is that it becomes an ownership. They own the program. Federal government doesn't own it, territorial government. And that's the success of the program, is that they own the program up front. But however, they have to dive into their own funding dollars to fund these programs, which makes it very challenging. So support for funding is ongoing. The gaps that we find, again, is the funding gaps to ensure these programs continue. There is no sustainable funding, and that's why we're here, is to try to acknowledge that we do need sustainable funding for the program that really works. And if there was another stream, there's 3 streams, and one stream is you got the RCMP doing the enforcement. You got the First Nation Inuit Policing Policy does the enforcement. We don't have this stream that allows for the community to take care of themselves under a community safety officer program, a community safety guardian program, where they can actually work from a holistic approach.
Sur votre site internet.
Now, on your website, you also mention the link between the impact of Western funding on economic development and the impact that that can have in communities. So I'd like to hear more from you on that, because I find that particularly interesting and innovative to understand that when you target funding, it doesn't always have the impact that we want, and it brings in disparities that have certain consequences, in particular in Indigenous communities.
Thank you for that. One of the things I've done is did a master's, worked on my master's in community economic development, and a lot of background I have is in economic development as well after leaving the police force. And what I see, and I come up with that diagram, it's called the Indigenous economic gap. Here we are where we have trauma, crisis in our Indigenous community based on colonization, et cetera. And on the other side, we have the economy, where some communities are wealthy. But the problem is our people are too unhealthy to come over to the other side. And what happened with Kwanlin Dun, that community, 20 years later, has made it to the other side where the entire community is thriving in economic prosperity. So what you need at the end of the day is Indigenous economic sustainability so the community can start carrying its own. So they're ready. It's like if you had trauma and we put safety as the foundation, you can start taking the steps to go to school, to go take to get a job, et cetera, and be part of the community. And that's what we have done for the entire community to shift to the economic prosperity. And this community of Kwanlin Dun is functioning. They're one of the wealthiest communities we have in Yukon now. Their people come home to work in their community. They thrive in their community. They have the lowest social assistance. They used to have the highest in Yukon. They're probably down to 0. The highest unemployment rate. Their people are coming home to work for their own government, accessing education, training, all that comes together by placing safety as the foundation, and that's what we do. So you can thrive as an autonomous, self-sustainable community. Thank you.
Combien de temps il me reste, s'il vous plaît?
How much time do I have left, please?
You have just 1 minute or so.
Oh, parfait. Ben, votre programme...
Perfect. Your program sounds like what we're doing with Val d'Or and the Joint Police Force. So what about collaboration with the RCMP? Are there still challenges? Are we managing to establish trust? And which concrete measures could the federal government establish to improve collaboration while still respecting the autonomy of Indigenous communities?
I'd ask my colleague here to answer that, please.
Thank you for the question. There's a long-standing history between Indigenous people and the RCMP or policing as agents of the Crown in the state, and it's a very fractured relationship. What we have found, and Kwanlin Dun is an interesting case example. It's our longest-standing program that we were involved in, and it's probably why we keep talking about it. They also commissioned an evaluation report that I would encourage you to read. It's not ours to share, but I believe that they would be happy to talk about the success of that program. One of the challenges was even in a well-policed area, well-resourced, people were not contacting the police. People were not accessing those justice services. There was a fundamental fear around what would happen when the RCMP would show up. The beauty of this intermediary program, which again is very different in every community. We have two elders in Teslin who are doing this work, and they work as a bridge between formal justice and the community, as an advocate and a guide, as well as a witness to how they're treated and what happens after, and the aftercare that wraps around them. So
Thank you very much. Sorry. And that brings us a little bit over the time, but
Simplement,
we still have
Mr.
lots more
Président,
questions.
c'était possible de nous envoyer...
Simply, Chair, if you could perhaps send in that report to the committee that you referred to, please.
Okay, now we have MP Moran for 5 minutes, please.
Highlighted the importance, again, of how communities need to police themselves, and you've highlighted some of the work that you've done in the Yukon and community safety officers. You named two women, two deadly aunties, and I'm wondering if you can elaborate on the uniqueness of how two deadly aunties are doing, keeping their community safe in the Yukon.
Thank you. It's amazing. You know, it's they're two matriarchal sisters that are over the age of 65, and they've applied for the program as community safety officers. And what we've brought back to that community is we revitalized their traditional justice, their traditional ways based on their culture, based on their values and their clan system. So the youth and the people are accountable to somebody, and it's revitalizing those traditional ways. And everybody in the community respect that, and they respect the deadly aunties. If the young ones say, you got to go home, they go home. The crime rates again dropped because they become the eyes and ears of the community. They know before the police know what's going on in the community. You know, they don't have to carry firearms to find that out. You know, they don't go out of harm's way. It's out of the trust. It's out of respect. And the big word is trust. They have the trust with the community. They don't rotate in and out. They stay in those communities. And they know everybody. And the success of that with the deadly aunties is that they're matriarchal, they're respected, and they're revitalizing their traditional laws and their traditional ways. And they've been there for almost 4 years now.
I love hearing solutions that are modern, but also taking the context of traditionals and how family values are important in the nations. I'm solutions focused, so I'm going to try to get through this really quick. One thing that the current government has done well is they've worked with First Nations to implement 10-year grant agreements in ISC. In order to qualify for a 10-year grant agreement, you get 10 years of sustained funding. You get a roadmap of 10 years rather than 1 or 2 years of contribution agreements that most First Nations have. In order to get one, you have to have a financial administration law, and you have to be FMB, First Nations Management Board certified. And so I kind of think of a solution when it comes to policing rather than the public safety FNIPP program that we have, which is woefully poorly regulated right now. And so I kind of think there's a correlation of maybe a future program of like a 10-year grant program. But I believe in, as a conservative, of protecting the Canadian taxpayer when it comes to taking a risk on each other. And so the risk is that First Nations and the FAL have to have an FAL to up their capacity, to be responsible. But they also have less stringent rules on how they spend their money. It's up to them on a 10-year grant agreement. And so when it comes to policing, I see a similar, maybe planting a seed here. What would, maybe when it comes to policing, you can have like a community safety law, like a community safety law in order to qualify for a 10-year policing agreement, maybe one day in the future. I'm just curious, what would you put in a community safety law for Indigenous communities, like in a framework? What do you think that looks like?
I think every nation is going to be really different. So there's no way to give exact, I think, recommendations around this because, for example, in the case of Tesla and their Tlingit society, they are matriarchal, so women held positions of responsibility around social norms and law, which is how that program worked really, really well. I would think that I want to remove the idea of it having to be around policing. Wellness and justice are a lot more than policing. You're starting at the end of the river. And I would suggest that we revisit how we view justice and access to justice to be a lot more than crime and criminality and responding to crime and criminality.
I do appreciate your answer, and I'm just finishing up with the comment, Chair, but I do appreciate your answer because I do think this could be like a correlation again of other social services have worked. This has worked with other First Nations, with the government, but here I don't think there's a one-stop-fits-all, but there are principles amongst Indigenous communities that traverse this whole country. And I think restorative justice and how it's less about policing and more about how you mentioned where to start when it comes to the river. Like, thank you for that answer.
And thank you very much for that. Next, we have Jaime for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank MP Morin for taking my question about the deadly aunties. I was really interested in hearing more about that. So I'm going to continue with that kind of line of question is, what's the collaboration like between the community safety officers and the RCMP in the region? And do you find that it's a working partnership, or is it failing?
I'm here to be honest, and they're failing. Yeah, and I say that because I'm a former police officer, and I used to work in an FNIPP position, and it never worked then. I'm going back 1985. You know, you can keep funding the police, the RCMP, on the road we're going, and we'll be back here in another 100 years. What we need to do is look at a healthier collaboration to say, yes, we do need the police. Yes, we do need the community safety officer program. Yes, we do need this. Right now, it's a struggle. We're almost like us versus them. And I know that. I was in the RCMP. It was always us versus them. You know, the threat is that we're allocated, say, $1.5 million to do community safety work. Well, what happens in Yukon is, well, the police don't get $1.5 million to hire more police. I policed in Whitehorse, Yukon when I was 19 years old. Two of us policing the whole Whitehorse area for a population of 19,000. It hasn't changed. It hasn't changed. And like I said, I'm here to be honest with you. And that program is failing. Allocate it to the communities like Indigenous, the autonomous Indigenous policing services with my colleague here. That's where they go to, not to the RCMP. You know, they basically, at the end of the day, enforcement work, we can't police our way out of trauma. So in terms of collaboration, it is a challenge. I wish the RCMP would step up. We were told specifically by the commanding officer in the Yukon, they will not work with us. Why? Because the program is successful and we're healing our people. And it costs, what, the government? We haven't had any dollars yet. So, very good question. Why it's a challenge is beyond me, but I think my colleague here has something to say. Thank you.
I think it's a challenging time. across the board, probably in the public service, and I'm guessing for the RCMP. I know that they were quite impacted by a white paper in March talking about the future of contracted policing, and I think that probably colors some of the conversations and collaboration that we have. I think one of the best descriptors I can give you is when a nation enacts its own safety programming, and say a year down the road, they're like, we were targeting domestic violence and K-files. We want to see the impact of what we've done. Have we lowered these? Are we actually collecting more of them now? Are we reducing the dark figure? We have had such challenges with nations requesting that data from the RCMP, which they don't own. They report up to CCJCS every month. It's a 30-second prime poll or a pros poll, and they won't share it to that nation. And again, it's disaggregated, anonymized. It's a series of numbers to a 9,000 level that just provides contextual detail around what was detected and then the outcomes of said detection and or the relationship between accused and victim.
Thank you for that. I have to think that from the testimony we're hearing today, what basically I've heard is that when communities have someone familiar to them, someone who is a part of that nation, that it helps de-escalate the situation a great deal. Right now, the RCMP isn't having that approach. Community safety officers have. But do you think we need a different kind of approach, or maybe a hybrid model? We've seen tribal policing being used in the States where people are able to have sheriffs in their community or tribal police. Is this a model we need? Do we need to think outside the current context of flexible options and find something different for First Nations policing?
Absolutely, and as I said, one of the things is that, there is a place for the police in the enforcement role. Absolutely, we need that. But I'm also saying there is a place for Indigenous communities, right? Enforcement was to enforce. It was to take away the children. That's what happened, and we haven't changed that. We have not since the inception of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So we need something different for our communities. Absolutely. We got to think outside the box. I always say think outside the circle. And we must do that. Change is not going to happen if we don't change here.
The last question I have, is there collaboration between community safety officers all across Canada that we can look at best practices and models that are really working well, that we can say this is where we put the money instead of putting the money into the RCMP, which seems not to be working as well as we would like in many of our First Nations communities?
Very quick answer.
Okay, yes. If you can put the money there, I'll guarantee that it'll work, and I'll guarantee you that we'll drop the crime stats in any community you put out.
Or 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Madame Nagano, je vais poursuivre avec vous.
Thank you. So to continue with you, Madame Gear, you've really talked about collaborative work between police officers and what type of training, what type of public safety strategy should be given to the police officers, or what type of protocol should be implemented so that they become culturally informed and have cultural responsive police services that would be more aware of your realities. And perhaps federal and provincial authorities should turn to this as well when they're setting the budgets. So do you have recommendations on all that?
So we just recently partnered with Yukon University. We donated our time over the last year to develop the first micro-accredited program for community safety officers as an induction training. And we would be happy to share information around that with the committee. The question you're asking, though, is difficult because every community is so different. I can speak to the communities that we've worked with and with the receptive RCMP detachments, because they do exist. There are some of them, right, that are trying really hard and doing great work. One of the things that we've done is an orientation for new members that's very specific to that community, that might be going and having tea with a couple of elders or participating, following a harvest, and doing these things as a passport to that community before they actually take on their patrolling duties. It's about building relationship, knowing each other as humans, and building trust. So it would be difficult to say this is what you need across the country beyond mental health literacy, trauma-informed care, the things that should be standard in any first responder training.
sorry, I just want to add in Yukon out of 14 First Nations is that we are working on our 5th community where there is the Community Safety Officer Guardian program.
J'aimerais vous entendre aussi rapidement quelles sont les stratégies les
And what are the most efficient strategies for you in terms of community prevention or culturally responsive strategies when it comes to combating drugs and alcohol use in the communities?
Sorry, really good questions. My background being drug enforcement, undercover police officer, et cetera. We work with the Safer Community and Neighborhood SCAN. And SCAN is a territorial legislated enforcement that come together, and we work with them on bootlegging, drug trafficking issues, and we come up collaboratively with innovative ideas within the community, with the community safety officers to eliminate the drug trafficking that are happening in the community, and it works. And it works because we're also looking at developing and designing this community safety app, if you want to fund that. And but it works because we're allowing the communities to be proactive. They're standing up. And they're giving us the information that we can work with the police and the SCAN. And we also created a community tips line that the people are calling in anonymously and confidentially to provide us the information. So have we tackled the hard drugs and crime in the communities? Yes.
Well, thank you for that. And now, Jamie, for 5 minutes, please.
5 minutes? Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Chair. And great testimony here today. And thank you very much for being here, both online and in person. I wanted to bring up something you had mentioned, Georgina, in your opening statement. You're talking about the Indigenous policing program itself, the fact that it hasn't really been updated since 1996. Like, a lot's changed in that time. This is something that's kind of baffling to me that, as Billy Morton just mentioned a few minutes ago, talking about the program funding, how you work within those constraints, but also now we're talking about a program that really hasn't seen many updates since 1996. There was an Auditor General report in 2014 that kind of outlined some changes, but really the fundamentals of the program has not really, I guess, undergone any substantial changes based on the realities of today.
Did you want to answer that? Sure. Yep.
Yeah, they haven't. And a lot has changed in the last 15, 20 years. The toxic drug crisis, the impacts of COVID on mental health and well-being, the economic recession, which is also, going to be highly implicated in social determinants of health and increasing crime rates. There is quite a bit that's changed in terms of, for example, bail laws, the capacity for supervision at federal, territorial, or provincial levels. It's become significantly more complicated, which is why, again, we're really confused by the Attorney General's report of the unspent millions and where they actually went, given that they're certainly not hitting the ground or impacting the communities that need it.
Before I get on to my next question, does our friend from Treaty 3 want to comment?
Thank you. Sure, I can certainly comment on that. I think I spoke to earlier of the change in allowing funding for specialty units. That was only 2 years ago. And so it has very much stayed the same over the last few decades. Again, we're continuing to advocate for changes to meet our needs, to be informed by communities and services that serve the Indigenous communities. But you are right, and it's unfortunate that in today's day and age, we're still educating, and people are still surprised that frameworks such as the FNIPP have been stagnant.
Yeah, it's really shocking to learn that, despite the fact that everything's changed so much. Like 1991, it was created. 1996, the internet was just really getting started here, and now we're dealing with all sorts of new things. Okay, I like what I'm hearing on all sides here, talking about the funding going directly to the Indigenous communities themselves, They know how best to deal with a lot of these issues in community. I'm liking the talk about standardized compensation, getting away from more program funding to allow police services to dive into pensions and offering benefits that might keep with retention for officers, so you don't have to keep this revolving. So how do you see this big change happening? So if we want to take away from, say the RCMP was mentioned earlier, say we want to move away more RCMP, more community policing, how do we change that whole formula so that it works, given the fact that there are differences within First Nations communities all across the countries?
Given that the money is already allocated through FNIPP, I would just suggest that you remove the gatekeeping of Public Safety Canada and the RCMP as administrators of the program. I would suggest that you convene a roundtable, bring in the Association of First Nations, the Council of Yukon First Nations, and other associations from across the country, and co-develop a model for both access and reporting.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think the money is there. I don't think we need to create any new money flow here. I think we just need to better spend what we're actually allocating through the budgetary process. I would agree. Thank you for that. Did Treaty 3 wanted to comment before I jump into my next one?
No, certainly as a service that works closely with our communities, I am certainly in support of empowering our communities to take care of their own safety. Our role is obviously enforcement, but obviously as an Indigenous service, we strive to be culturally responsive and have that, enhanced connection and trust given the historical realities of our relationship. But for example, in one of our communities, Lac La Croix, they have enacted inherent law, which includes community safety officer positions, but that's where we hit the wall, is how do we support them as a police service when we're struggling financially, and in supporting them and finding that training and their own funding to sustain that program at their community level.
That brings us to your 5 minutes, Jamie.
I thought you said 7.
7? No. Nice try, though. Well, thank you very much to all of our witnesses today. It was... Okay.
Do you want to talk to your motion?
Do you want me just to thank the witnesses? Is there something else you would like to talk about? I'm going to thank the witnesses and excuse them. So thank you very much for your excellent testimony today from all of you, and Chi Miigwech. So thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Miigwech.
Okay, so folks, this brings us to the end at 6:30. Do I have agreement to adjourn? Yes. Agreed. Shaking heads. Yes. Agreement to adjourn. 6:30. Okay. Adjourn.